Welcome to Lesson 13, Advanced Blending Techniques. In this video, I'm going to get you started on understanding blends and gradient meshes. First of all, I want you to select your zoom tool and click and drag in or around using the marquee that center part of the apple. Now we'll start out by applying a blend immediately, and then I'm going to take you off into a new document just to explain a little bit more about how that blending tool works. First of all, I want you to have your swatches open and grab the swatches by the tab and pull it out. And if it's not in a small list view, go to your panel menu up in the upper right and change it to small list view. I'm opening this up so I can see all the colors that we've prepared for you to do this exercise. Now, first of all, I want you to take your solid selection tool and select this inside part of the seed and select inner seed. You'll also see that there's a stroke on here. You can change the stroke to none and then select that outside shape and change that fill color to be outer seed and make sure your stroke is none. Now we're going to select both of these shapes, and I am pressing Control-Alt-B, or if you're on the Mac you can press Command-Option-B. That creates a blend between those two shapes and those two colors. So if I zoom in a little bit here, you can see a nice smooth transition from one color to another. Now this is when I want to explain this better so you really get it. I'm creating a new file and I'm just leaving it at whatever default size it wants to be. I'm taking a circle, a small circle, and I'm going to give it no stroke, but I am going to give it a fill. I am now going back up to my selection tool and option dragging the circle someplace else, and I'm going to make it a little bigger, and I'm changing the fill color. I'm now selecting both of those shapes. Now I could either press Control-Alt-B or Command-Option-B to create an automatic blend, or Control-Z, or I can go to the blend tool, which is over in your tools panel, and it looks like a square going into a circle. And if I take that tool and click on one and go to the other, it essentially does the same thing. Now when I double click on this tool though, you'll see that it's set to go to smooth color. I can also change this to specified steps and tell it I only want 10 steps, and I can preview that, or maybe only 3 steps. So that gives me a total of 5, because it doesn't count the first and last. And then click OK. You'll see a path is here. If I take my direct selection tool, I can change that path. Let me click off and back on again, and they follow. Now I can even come up to this top blended object and change the color, and you can see that is reflected as well. It's dynamically linked as a blend no matter what you do, even if you change the shape. So the blend tool is used not only to help blend objects and make them look more realistic, but for simple things like this. Maybe I want a border, and in my border I want a circle, and then I'm going to hold down my Alt or Option key and drag it over here, and I know that I want about 10 circles in between. So just by selecting both of these, pressing Control-Alt-B or Command-Option-B, I get my circles. I double click on the blend tool and I tell it that I want specified steps and I want 8 in between, and there I go. So I don't have to measure it, I don't have to worry about aligning and distributing, and I can even stretch this out to extend it more or shrink it in. If I want to extend it out without distorting the shape, I can take my direct selection tool, click off, find that path, and then extend that as well. You can even go into your Convert Anchor Point tool in your pen tool and click and drag to make that a curved path instead of a straight path as well. So let's go back to this other exercise. Because I did this once, I'm going to back out. I'm pressing Control- to back out, or Command- if you're on the Mac. I'm holding down my spacebar to push this over, and I'm just going to replicate that over here. Before I even start, I'm selecting both of these and getting rid of the stroke though. Going to the fill, selecting this one and choosing inner seed, and selecting the outside one and selecting outer seed. making sure I have my selection tool selected, clicking on the inner seed and clicking on the outer seed, and then pressing Control-Alt-B or Command-Option-B. Let's do this for the area surrounding the seed, but this time let's use the gradient tool. So I have this selected, and then I'm going to go up to Window, Gradient. I can select the default gradient by just clicking underneath the fill and the stroke over here in the Tools panel. That is a simple gray gradient. I don't want that. So I'm going to take my swatches panel, move it over a bit, and instead of using that, I'm going to take the back of seed color and drag it on top of this color stop, and the back of seed brown and drag it on top of the black color stop. And then I'm taking my gradient tool and saying, go this way to create my gradient. Now I can save this gradient by just dragging it in to the swatches panel. That way I can click with my selection tool in this other area on the other side and just add that new gradient as well. Now this center part, I also want to apply a gradient. In this case, I want to apply the last used gradient, but I'm going to change this. So I'm taking white and replacing that color stop. And then I'm taking center and replacing the second color stop. I also want to change it to radial and get rid of the stroke. So we're starting to see how this apple is forming. I'm going to do one more thing. I'm not taking this through the whole way, but I think enough that you can get going on the lesson in the book, and that is to create a gradient mesh. So I'm pressing Control minus or Command minus, taking my selection tool and selecting this outside area. I'm going under Object and selecting Create Gradient Mesh. I'm setting it for 3 rows and 2 columns, flat 100%. Looks like that. I am now using my Direct Selection tool to select individual anchor points within here. I'm selecting this anchor point up here, and I'm making sure my fill is forward, and then I'm selecting Inner Apple 1. And you'll see that it creates a gradient within this apple shape. Now I'm going to attempt to select the second anchor point, but you'll notice when I click on this that I sometimes select this other item. A nice little trick is to learn how to use Control or Command 2, which will lock items temporarily. And now you can see I can select that guy, and in this case I'll use Inner Apple 2 for that anchor point. Come down to this anchor point, and again, if you're having a problem selecting it, select what's back there, go ahead and get that selected, and then press Command 2 to lock it up. This is going to be Inner Apple 3, and then we'll just go down to the bottom and select Inner Apple 4. Now if you take your Direct Selection tool, you can even edit how these meshes are falling so that you can adjust them to get the shading that you want. And you can go back and change the colors as many times as you want. So in this lesson, you discovered how to use the blend tool and also how to take advantage of the gradient mesh tool.